You're listening to Scaling Impact, the #1 podcast for conscious entrepreneurs changing the world. Today on the podcast, I'm joined by Philip McKernan. Philip is an author, filmmaker, and inspirational speaker who has shared stages with Richard Branson, Stephen Covey, and the Dalai Lama, to name a few. He's the founder of the One Last Talk movement, and his pioneering philosophy, SoulSet, equips and empowers people to uncover their gifts and impact the world. Philip has worked with everyone from Olympic athletes to billionaire entrepreneurs and everyone in between. In this episode, we talk about practical steps to uncovering your personal purpose, the reason it's critically important to know it clearly, and how you can build a business around it. We also cover the importance of having a personal vision, uncovering your unique superpower that you probably didn't realize you had, and the self-imposed handicap most entrepreneurs apply to themselves that holds them back from achieving the life they truly want. Interesting points covered include the subconscious blind spot that keeps people from going after what they really want, discovering your unique gift, how your location dramatically affects the way you think and answer questions, debunking the "I'm doing it for my kids" excuse entrepreneurs hide behind, and how to find what really matters to you so you can build a life and a business around it. All right, so Philip, I wanted to talk about the one last startup concept. I've heard you talk about it. It got me really excited, and it kind of haunted me in a good way for a little while. Just thinking about what would it be like to challenge the world of entrepreneurs with one last startup. Tell me about where you came up with this and what the intent is behind it.
Yeah, well, I mean, what I came up with was a concept called One Last Talk, which we may talk about in a minute. It's a live event where people get 15 minutes or less to share the one last talk they'll ever give before they die. And people on stage aren't necessarily dying, although arguably we're all dying at some point in our lives. So what it does is it really focuses the mind and typically opens the heart, and people start delivering talks that ordinarily they wouldn't have delivered. And the last one we ran in Boulder, there was a gentleman called David Cohen who was one of the founders of Techstars. And it was he that came up with the idea of One Last Startup subsequently after the event. And he reached out to me and he said, I really like the degree of urgency is probably the wrong word, but the degree of, I suppose, the challenging nature of if this was your one last startup and you're going to spend, if you're creating a startup and you're going to spend, 10 or 15 years developing and launching and running and maybe passing this business on or selling this business or exiting this business, and you were challenged with the idea that this was your one last startup, would you do it differently? Where would you go with this? Would, in actual fact, would you start the business that's in your heart as opposed to the one that's in your mind? And would you start something that has more of a, I suppose, social impact or environmental impact, more than just a financial impact? And so David really was the idea guy behind One Last Startup, and we're going to be pushing that out to as many entrepreneurs as a challenge as possible around the world.
Wow. Yeah, so the idea hit me hard because I've never seen an entrepreneur start with that in mind. I've always seen them start with opportunity. Well, there's 3 things that I am somewhat interested in. 2 of them have big opportunities, and I start to talk to them about what they're working on. And they say, "Oh, this is an awesome project. It's a paperclip maker, and the business sector really needs these paperclips because it can save them, $10 million a year." And you're like, "Okay, interesting." And you can tell like they're trying to be excited. And then you start to hit on, so what else do you have in the works? And they're like, "Oh, not too much." And then you're like, if you had to start something else, or any ideas that you've had kind of in the way, well, yeah, there's this little thing over here. And they start talking about this little hidden idea that they start to, and they start to hum and haw. All of a sudden their slickness goes down because it means something to them. And all of a sudden they don't want to put that out in the public because people might laugh. People might, I don't know what the fear is, but and I often say, forget about the paper clips. I want to hear what's going on over here. You seem very interested in this. And they start to bring it out, and then you see their face light up, and all of a sudden this enthusiasm and passion comes out for what they're working on. And they're like, but I don't know how it would be a business. It's just, something that hits me hard because of my mom and what she went through. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like this is really exciting. And they're like, yeah, but I want to tell the business, what about an investor or a business partner? I want to tell people about the money opportunity. That's what'll get them excited, right? And I say, no, even investors that are, even if you had a sociopathic investor that just cares about money, he wants to see your commitment.
Yeah.
And he wants to know, this is actually a passionate project that you're working on. So the concept of, if you were about to die, what startup would you create? And for a lot of people, they think opportunity first. So if you saw someone start to think this through, what would be the natural process that they would go through? So if you said there was a mental reframe. What is the mental reframe that happens when someone starts to think like this?
Well, I suppose it's that's kind of step 2 to some extent in terms of what's the mental reframe when they start to think about it. My ask or my invitation or challenge is to give themselves permission to begin to think about it. So it's just begin to play with those ideas. So they have the idea on their brain. What about they take the one in their back pocket on the right side and the one on the left side, and they throw them on the table for conversation before they move past them too fast, before they end up, setting up, quote unquote, the wrong business for them, and then find themselves in 10 or 15 years. I play a little game, James, with clients, with entrepreneurs. I did it 2 days ago in Toronto here. And I basically played this little game where you're not allowed to do what you do professionally. It's not you wish to give it up. It's just a game. You're not allowed to do it. You have to do something completely different. What would it be? And inevitably, when we go around the room, number one is the amount of people that are so clear in what it is extraordinary. And there's always inevitably 1 or 2 people who simply don't want to play the game. And how I know they don't want to play the game is they say, oh no, I do what I do. And I go, I know you do what you do. I know you love what you do, and that's what you're telling yourself. That's great. And that might still be the case. I'm not asking you to sign a contract. I'm simply asking you to play a game. If you couldn't do what you do, what would you do professionally? And finally, when they let themselves play, just give themselves permission to play in this sandbox, it's extraordinary what comes out. One man sat in front of me the other day, and he's a very sizable business and doing something completely the opposite of what came out. But what came out for him is he said, I'd make cheese. And I'm thinking, excuse me? He said, I'd make cheese. And he's not just did he know the type of cheese he wants to make up, not just, and I'm not talking about personally at home in his kitchen. I'm talking he wants to create a business around this. And he knows exactly the geographical location. He knows exactly the type of building. What I'm saying is that might be a silly example for some, but nonetheless illustrates that often we have these ideas in our hearts, ideas that are dormant, that if we just gave them a little bit of oxygen, a little bit of space, to either dismiss them or engage with them. But don't leave them dormant. Don't leave them hidden away from the world, because you'll end up with a lot of regrets around that.
And so you would have the most reservation with the people that won't play the game, because it's obviously a blind spot, or it's a closed door they're not willing to entertain, which means there's something there.
Exactly.
Why wouldn't they play the game?
I think they're afraid. They're afraid of, they're afraid to run the risk of succeeding doing something they really want to do.
Ooh, run the risk of succeeding.
Doing what they really want to do. Because ultimately, if you create a business that fails, and the stats show that a lot of startups don't actually make it, but deep down you can go, well, it wasn't really what I wanted to do. It was another widget. It was another app. It was another thing in this crowded market. And, it wasn't really, you don't say these things, but subconsciously you're giving yourself an out. And I think one of the greatest challenges for anybody in this world is to run the risk doing something you really want to do on this earth. Right. Run the risk of falling on your face, making the impact that you're really capable of making in this world. And the final piece is, I also often think that when it comes to our gifts and the things that lie a little bit out of the intellectual space in terms of the potential impact we can make in the world, I think we don't put a value on it. So for example, when was the last time you met somebody who said, one thing I'm brilliant at doing is breathing. I'm such a great breather, because we do it naturally and organically. And one example of this is when I do the One Last Talk experience, when I work with people to help them extract their talk, there's a gentleman called Tucker Max who helped me with the book around it, said, I want to go through the speaker retreat because I want to see the magic. And instantly I felt insecure and inadequate, because I'm thinking he's going to watch me work with these speakers. He's going to wait for me to, almost like I'm baking a cake. And he's looking for the moment I go down, I pull out this secret drawer at the bottom of my kitchen. I take out this little pink salt, sprinkle it on the cake. And that's a secret recipe that's been handed down through the generations of my family. And I said, Tucker, there is no magic sauce. And he goes, because you do this so naturally and so organically, you don't even value how good you are doing it.
Wow.
So the secret sauce is something we tend not to put a lot of value on. And what we then do is we then say we want to create value as society sees it. And society typically rewards us, particularly in the startup space, for making money.
Wow. So what questions are, if someone was to just jot down a few questions right now, what would be a few questions that they could sit with? One is, if you were to die, and actually I did this one time on a plane. So when you started talking about one last talk and things like that, I got very interested because I did a bit of an experiment that one time on a plane where I said, if I was to die in 90 days, what would I do in the next 90 days? And then I set a timer for 1 minute, and at the minute I die. So I could only write down as much stuff, and I only got through a few things, and I was like, shoot, I didn't get to, it did bring some priority to me. It had to do with my kids and something I would build or leave for them to understand who I was, because they're young kids. Yep. And I'd want them to, be able to understand who I was, but almost like be able to talk to them as an adult. And there's a whole bunch of things that came out really quick, but I was surprised that I got the first 3 or 4 out, and then 5 and 6 and 7 were the ones that I would usually put at the top if it wasn't under a 1 minute constraint.
Yes. I think what's interesting is that there's a guy that both of us know, Dan Martell, and he asked me a question one day. He said, why do you bring people away on these different trips around the world to different locations? And I said, I could give you a question to ponder on a tube on the way into New York City. That same question presented as sitting on a beach in Jamaica with your family and your kids running around. That question would land at different places emotionally for you. In other words, it would be in your head initially, then it would drop into your gut, so deeper and deeper. In other words, the depth of where the question would go, and therefore the subsequent answer that would come would be different. Otherwise, why do I go to India? Why do I go to Peru? Why do I go to these places? I'm better off just sitting in a hotel at an airport in any city in North America. Because I do believe the location, the frame of mind you're in, and so on and so forth, determines the outcome. So what I would do is, if somebody's really serious about, answering the question of, if this was my one last startup, what would I do? It's not the question in isolation. I think if you really want to do this right, I would ask you to, if you had one last message to give the world, what would it be? Just write it out, just 2 or 3 sentences. Then I would ask you to write one last letter. The last letter you'll ever write. Who would you write it to? And what would you say? I did this exercise 2 days ago in a workshop, and it was profound for people.
And that's the type of thing where you've seen the situation where the dad is on his deathbed, and all of a sudden the son that hasn't talked to him in a few years comes up and starts talking to him and pretty much says the thing that he wished he could have said all along.
Absolutely.
And he waits until the last minute to kind of say it. So you're just pushing that time frame way earlier.
Totally.
And putting the pressure on it to say, what would you say and who would you say it to? Like, really, where is the truth that's inside you that's not being spoken?
Absolutely. And there's probably a few people listening to this, if not a lot of people listening to this right now, and go, hang on a second, you had me at one last startup. Now we're going into this very deep woo-woo place. Like, what's this about? What's this got to do with business? It's got everything to do with business. Because unfortunately, part of my job is picking up the pieces from men and women who have spent 10 or 15 years pursuing the goal they thought would make them happy, the financial freedom that they thought would give them the so-called freedom, to find out subsequently that it hasn't quite worked out that way. So my job is really about helping people get clear on who they are and what they're here to do sooner in the process. You come out of writing your one last letter. Does it answer everything? No, but it starts to ground you. It starts to remind you of what's important. Then you write your one last talk, and then you ask yourself the question, okay, now that I know a bit more about what's important to me personally, which I think is completely underrated in business, now how do I build a business that's going to support who I am at my core and what it is I want to do in this world to make sure that the business doesn't own me and I don't lose myself in my business. So that question presented at the beginning is powerful. What would your one last startup be? But if you do some of this little personal exploration and then ask the question, I believe it'll bring you to a deeper, richer, more creative space. So you're getting in touch with your creativity, your imagination, and that's where some of the greatest ideas that have ever come from for humanity. But that's where you could create a business that not just matters to the world, but it matters to you. And that is a very rare thing in the world today.
Wow. So personal vision, you feel, is integral to business success. So there's kind of a personal vision piece, and then there's a business vision.
Yes.
Tell me about how because I know that you've dealt with lots of businesses, multi-million-dollar or even billion-dollar funds, things like that. I know you work with a lot of people that have made a lot of material wealth and have a lot of influence and power. And oftentimes where it breaks down, you've told me that it has to do with the personal vision, and it's almost like something they've forgotten. So
yes,
tell me about that.
Yeah, I suppose from because we're chatting in audio here today, and I'm not in front of people. I suppose in a live environment, probably the best way to describe this is if you think about a clock, and you think at 9 o'clock, you've got somebody feels like, and we use this as a kind of a way of I suppose imagining where the breakdown is. At 9 o'clock, somebody has a financial issue in their business. And they go, well, that's my biggest challenge, revenue, sales, profitability, whatever it happens to be. And then we come back to say 6 o'clock, and that's their team. In other words, who is in the organization? And they go, well, it could be a challenge as well. And most businesses and most business owners I work with, and I don't consider myself a business coach, but that is primarily a lot of where their they think their challenges are between the right people, recruitment, retention, engagement, inspiring their team, motivating their team, cohesiveness within their team, where their team are distributed around the world, all of those logistical nightmares, and then the revenue that team is producing. And they're the two areas where most people, and I go, great, so let's just go back to 3 o'clock. How clear is the business vision? And often a business owner takes an annual retreat where they focus on the business, and then they have quarterly engagements with their team to communicate the vision for the business. And typically the business vision is pretty good. But one of the things I see is I often hear business owners saying, oh, the business vision is crystal. And then I go, great, so if I pulled one of your team aside and asked them what the business vision is, you're telling me they'd know it crystal clear. Well, I mean, I think so, because last week I updated. In other words, it's changing left, right, and center, which is part of the entrepreneurial spirit. That's fine. But here's where it always breaks down. So they might even have the perfect, at 3 o'clock, business vision. At 6 o'clock, the perfect team. And at 9 o'clock, they might have enough revenue, or that's where the breakdown is. But here's where it starts. You go to 12 o'clock and you say, so what do you want personally? Not just from your business, but in this world. Mm-hmm. An entrepreneur sit in front of me, and they'll eventually, out of discomfort, go, oh, freedom. Great. Oh, wow, that's fantastic. In my sarcastic term, I'll go, brilliant. Now, what is that for you? And they'll often cite me some beautiful lines from a book, but in essence, when you challenge it and go deeper, they don't know. And I know some people are still under the illusion a business is designed and should be designed to do one thing and one thing only, and that's make money. I agree, it should be designed to make money, but it also should be designed at 3 o'clock to support what it is you want to do and who you want to be at 12 o'clock. When you get the personal vision in place, which is the work I do with people, you then look at your business and either build a business or pivot a business to support what it is you want to do personally. What will end up happening is you'll engage and attract the right people for your team. And as long as you've got a decent product to back that up, the revenue will naturally and organically come. And then you can use that revenue to continue to support your dreams and your personal aspirations.
Right. And one thing we always talk about with visionaries is I don't love the idea of a CEO that's a sociopathic CEO that just wants to get the bottom line for the shareholders. Usually the best CEOs or the best leaders are actual visionaries that have a vision. And it's not just the business vision, it's the fact that their personal vision aligns perfectly with this business's vision.
Absolutely.
And so they're sending out a loud, clear vibe, frequency message to the world saying, this is what I'm all about and this is what I'm doing for the next 25 years.
Yeah.
Hop on or watch out. Get out of the way.
and we've all hit days where we wonder, does the world want us or our product or our service or our new idea? And I find that a lot of businesses just give up too soon. And they just let go just at the critical time where they're about to break through. And what ends up happening is every time you look back in that process, you'll find that the business vision was just something that stood outside of who they are. If it's connected to who you are personally, when you hit that dark time, when you hit that moment where you think it's all going to shit and you have to dig so goddamn deep and you have to go into a well of strength and energy that you don't even know exists, that's only possible. Your ego can carry you some of the way. Mm-hmm. But when you've got to go so deep and find a well of energy to pick yourself out of this rut, it can only come from your personal connection to what this business is ultimately going to do from the world and how it relates to you personally. And I don't mean how much money you're making from it. Then you'll find an energy and a determination that to pull and push through any of these business challenges. I mean, I've seen this time and time again. I've seen entrepreneurs go right to the edge, almost lose everything, being told that it's over. But because they're connected, their personal vision is connected to the business vision, they've pivoted how they did the business, but they've recovered and gone on to make incredible things.
Right. So these visionaries, when they're getting started and they're trying to build businesses, they often go into a scramble phase where they're testing things almost like in petri dishes. There's an entrepreneurial scramble at the beginning of a startup, usually with everyone. They don't sleep very well. They don't eat very well. They overwork, and it's hard to say it's not necessary sometimes. I think it's detrimental to businesses that it carries on, but it's really hard once you set the tone and the pace for the business in the initial scramble that you have to break the pace, and most people can't break that pace. They set it up in such a way that and they want to be that integral to the business. They want it to have to take over their thoughts all day long and, essentially really be in it. And so during the scramble, how do you find people getting out of the scramble? Because I know you deal with a broad range of people. There's not too many that are proactive coming to you and saying, hey, I'm going to be building a really large company in the next couple of years. I want to get all my personal stuff in order, deal with some of my childhood trauma, get my relationships in right order so I have a solid foundation to do this. You typically probably deal with people that have had some kind of breakdown or a crack, or their ego in some way has been cracked, or the challenge has proven that, wow, there's a lot under here that if I was to solve, I could probably go a lot further. So you get them when they're hitting their capacity. Yes. And their capacity almost seems to be getting smaller. And tell me about what those people tend to, like, what's a example of someone that comes to you?
Yeah, I mean, it's changing, and I think people are being more proactive as opposed to reactive as it comes to the the work that I do, and more focusing on who they are personally as in addition to how they show up professionally in the world. If somebody wants to come to me and just build a very sizable business and make lots of money, and that's all they want to do, that's just not my gig. I have no interest in that. But if somebody wants to come to me and make sure that they're staying grounded, that what they're building is in alignment with who they are, that they don't want to build something that has a detrimental long-term effect on their business or in their personal life, I should say, then I'm all over that. Typically what happens is a very typical entrepreneur or founder that comes to me is somebody that has built something, is standing on the top of a mountain looking across the horizon, and what they thought, the feeling they thought they would get when they got there hasn't happened. Now, if they pause long enough, what they can do is do two things. One is ask themselves, why? Why isn't this feeling? Why don't I feel as successful as I should right now? But the biggest mistake they make is they look across the horizon, and what they simply do is assess that they just climbed the wrong mountain. In other words, they built the wrong business. So they come down off the mountain, cross the meadows, back up the other side, climb another mountain, meaning another business, and continue to do this over and over and over. And that climb down the mountain, across the meadows and up the other side can be 3 to 4 or 5 years. Right. This is a metaphor for how we do things, as opposed to stopping and going, okay, hang on a second here. I have achieved success, but I don't feel satisfied.
The first time I saw you speak, I saw this incident happen where the person in my row, you asked a question from stage, and the person beside me, you asked someone to share, and the person beside me stood up, and he was a tough guy, and he was pretty shaky in his voice, and he said, this is a situation that I just realized. You asked me a question, I wrote it down on a piece of paper, and I just realized something pretty profound, and it was about his wife, actually, about one of his divorce about 5 years ago. And it was about what the root of it was, and how it happened, and how he had this issue his whole life since he was young, and he had some girls breaking up with him when he was young, and he just projected into new relationships that they were going to leave him, and then they left him, and the guy just started to break down and cry, and you asked him one question. Well, he was on the edge, and people sometimes, I've heard of people giving you Kleenex boxes with philipmckernan.com on but he was right on the edge, and you asked him this question, which really broke him down. And it was, if you had known that, what you just discovered right now, 5 years ago, what difference would it have made? And that's the exact situation I imagine with the person at the bottom of the mountain that doesn't know how important this base camp work is that they're going to do, but it might determine which mountain they climb in the next 5 years. So the reason for Exponential University, the reason we have your piece of the curriculum and the element with start with why, Simon Sinek, or begin with purpose, and orient, who you are, where you're going, and what you want to do. It's so important to have people start there, or if they're early on, to reorient quickly. Otherwise, like you said, there's a lot of research coming out about suicidal entrepreneurs. And there's even people, I think it was 2 people at Zappos in the happiest culture of all time that ended up committing suicide. And Tony Hsieh was just beside himself trying to figure out what had gone wrong. And there's some issues in that world of why that was. They just didn't feel like they could actually be unhappy because they were working for the best place in the world. But it's very similar for all of us, that we just don't feel the license to be unhappy when we might have some money in the bank, or, a relatively happy family and things like that. And so when you get to the top of the mountain, the thing I worry about most is what I've called the downside of up. So as you succeed in certain types of things, there's downsides to it. One of them is that the people around you can't relate to you anymore. You start to lose touch with people that are like you, and you become isolated. So as you climb that mountain or the pyramid, there's a smaller amount of people like you at each of the stages as you grow.
Yeah.
And it becomes very isolating, where the CEO has no one to talk to. They have no peer. They have no, they're so enveloped in their business, they don't even talk to other CEOs, let alone someone who's got their back or their vision to hold them accountable to. And so what I worry about most is people getting to the top, and that is the moment where you want to, if you sacrificed it all to get to the top of the mountain. And I literally, I'm thinking of my dad. I'll just say it out loud. I'm thinking of my dad. He's passed away now, but he spent his whole life really being a workaholic, and he thought that was the number one thing he needed to do as a man and as a dad. And he learned that from his dad, who didn't do it. So his dad left when he was very young, and he felt the pain of that and the trauma from that. And his dad didn't take care of them financially, and they struggled. And so my dad decided I would never let my family deal with that. And so he created just his own version of the same problem, where he dedicated his full life to his work, and he had over 32 years of excellent service, people at work, like thousands of people really, really respecting him. But at home, things were falling apart. And he had a wife that was going through a lot of mental health things. She was in the hospital, in and out. He had kids that were a little nutty. Me and my sister, when we were in a dark phase in our teens, and just troubles all the way along. And he didn't focus on the family. He thought, my one thing that I need to do, if I have a family problem, I need to earn money and bring stability to the family. Mm-hmm. And he ended his life alone, at the end of it all, with his pension, his company really respecting him. And even at his funeral, a lot of people came out and really paid homage to him. But his family was also there. And we had to, just be real about what had happened, and the fact that he did get lost in this one pursuit. He was climbing that same mountain his whole life, and he wouldn't look down. He wouldn't look at what the cost was that was accruing every step of the way. And he ended up, with a divorce, where his wife, they weren't talking anymore, my mom. He ended up with a daughter that was kind of estranged, and he not supported, and she was not wanting to speak with him anymore. He ended up with a son who, for the last 5 years of his life, didn't speak to him because of the breakdown that they had in their communication and respect. And then I was kind of the last one, and I had a very light relationship with him. I tried to be friendly, but it was not even close to what the relationship was that I wish I could have had. So when I go into entrepreneurship and I see young people, let's say, working on a beautiful vision, awesome mission, and they're becoming workaholics, I obviously get that reaction, a visceral push away reaction, because I know that I could easily be a workaholic. I have dedicated huge amounts of my time to work. I have worked, when we built Podium Publishing, we would work Monday to Friday. I would work a full-time job, with commute time and everything like that. And then from Monday to Friday, from 10 p.m. till 2 a.m. were office hours for 2 years. And so we built the company in the night, and then launched it, and then still ran 2 things at the same time, and had to scramble. That's the scramble. And I became used to that, and I had to very quickly figure out, how do I get out of this zone? Otherwise, I'm just repeating the exact same pattern. And I guess I just want people to take that very seriously. because you can't undo time. It's the one resource we don't have. It's not infinite. It's
But I suppose one of the challenges, people are listening right now, they're just saying, geez, I got to hit the share button because I know 10 of my friends that are in this bucket. And therein lies one of the blind spots for humanity is none of us wake up in the morning and go, I'm going to build a business that's going to pull my marriage apart. Mm-hmm. None of us wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to build a business and start to pursue this for the next 10 or 20 years that's going to ultimately lead me to regrets. None of us self-identify as we're beginning to drink alcohol that we're ultimately heading to be an alcoholic.
Right.
So we don't see where we are. We don't see where we're going. We don't want to see. We don't take the time. One of the greatest things that I believe that everyone should do is just assume you're not as aware as you think you are. Make that natural assumption. People who tell me how self-aware they are drive me nuts because I don't believe them. They don't believe themselves. And the reason they don't believe themselves is because they're too busy telling everybody how self-aware they are because they're so insecure in their own skin. People who tell you that constantly tell you about their top values. I say, stop telling me about your values and show me them. So just assume that you're not as aware as you think you are. Just assume that you've got blind spots. I mean, I just came back from a trip to India.
The nature of a blind spot is, I literally told someone, I feel like this could be a blind spot of yours. They're like, no, I don't see it. I don't see it. I said, do you know what a blind spot is? You literally can't see it.
Yeah.
So you have to have someone close to you that you trust that could once in a while say, hey buddy, do you think this could be a blind spot? And then you have to be open to it. Just open to like you said earlier, the game, like play the game with me for a second. If this was a blind spot, what evidence would you see?
and that to me is just, you move from a place of awareness to complacency when you self-identify yourself as super aware. I did a podcast interview about 6 or 8 months ago, and the lady, God love her, because she'd done so much research on me, and she opens up with this question. She's so excited. And she goes, Philip, I'm so happy to have you on the podcast. I said, it's great to be here. She said, my first question is this: how did you become so authentic? And I looked at her, and I never take questions in advance. In fact, I insist on not. And I said, well, with respect, you're making an assumption I am. And her face drops and she goes, you mean you're not? And I said, I am more authentic than I used to be, but I'm not even close to where I want to be. And she was stunned. She was absolutely stunned. And it took her a minute or two to kind of recover and get into the next question. But she just assumed that, number one is I'm authentic because she's heard me speak or whatever. And number two is she expected me to say, oh, well, now that you ask, I'm so happy because my 10-step system to being super authentic and super real is X, Y, and Z. And maybe I am 9 out of 10. When I self-identify with that, I'm blind. I assume I'm 5 out of 10. And I hope I assume I'm 5 out of 10 for the rest of my life. And everyone else can judge whether I'm full of shit or I'm authentic or whatever it happens to be.
Right. And I've been in that spot where I feel really excited. I think I'm at about 9 out of 10 on this certain area of, say, personal development or growth or something like that, or awareness. Yeah. And all of a sudden, the chart goes up to 15, and I'm like, what? I'm halfway. And then I realized, no, I just overestimated my 9 out of 10. It's always been at a 10. I'm more at a 5. Yeah. But it feels so high compared to where I was at when I was at a 4 or a 3. Yeah. And so I know you've had examples of that where people have said that, where they give you a 9 out of 10 on any chart, and you start asking some interesting questions. And
then you find out inevitably they're not. But we're just going back to the entrepreneurial drive, which tends to be people almost feel like it's not necessary, it's expected at the beginning. And I've seen people build extraordinary businesses without this chaotic, frenetic need to have chaos in their life. But also, how do you turn that off? And sometimes it becomes part of your identity, that you feel that business needs to be hard, and you start running so hard, you become a workaholic, and then suddenly you can't turn that shit off. But one of the great classic lines is, so what about your kids? Oh, I'm doing this for them. And I go, oh, great. Oh, so you've sat little Johnny and Sarah down and you've explained that the reason you're not at the soccer games and the dad's not really present physically. And when he is present physically, emotionally, he's not in the room because he's on his cell phone or whatever. You've actually explained that you're doing that for them. Oh, so they know, and they've given you like full permission. And I'm being a smart ass to make a point. And that is, if you're using your kids as a reason or an excuse to be a workaholic, if that's your primary excuse, well, make sure that they know that, because they didn't sign up for that necessarily. And I have yet to meet a parent, I've yet to meet an adult who goes back in time and wish their parents worked harder. I have never met one. Every single parent I've ever worked with wished that they were seen, or that they were connected, or they got more time, or they connected more emotionally, or they saw their parents being more vulnerable, or they saw dad been working less, or that they felt that they were just a tad more important than the new app that their father or their mother was building. I have not yet met a parent who looks back on their childhood and said, I wished my dad had worked harder.
Right. And you meet people of both extremes too. I know at one point you said people use their kids as excuses a lot of the time. Oh, I'm not going to pursue my dream because I have 3 little ones at home, or because I'm a single mother and I have 2 children. I don't feel like I'm allowed. I'm doing this for my kids. I'm suppressing my dream and my...
Absolutely.
So what do you say to that?
That's a great point. So I had a gentleman the other day in a workshop, and he's been working in a job. And again, I'm not one of these people that feel like you have to have an entrepreneurial endeavor in order to be successful in society. If a job works for you, great, as long as it's working for you. But this man, quite clearly, has been working in corporate America for 18 years and it's killing him. And he wants to become an entrepreneur. He wants to create a startup, and he's scared. And he says that I'm attached to the golden handcuffs. It's the money that keeps me. Guaranteed, it's never money. Okay. With all the work and all the thousands of people I've served and all the years I've been doing it all over the world, the one thing I know for certain, well, there's 2 things I know for certain. If your reason or excuse is time or money, it's never time and it's never money. Go deeper than that, and there's always something else. And for him, what was really interesting is that he's completely oblivious to the cost. I said, what's the cost on your soul, on your heart, on your imagination, on your creativity, on your confidence as a man? What's the cost? And he goes, I've never thought about that. I said, well, you better start thinking about it now, buddy, because ultimately, if you don't think about it now, it's going to haunt you tomorrow. Think about it today, or it'll haunt you tomorrow. And then finally, I hit him with I suppose the emotional sledgehammer. And I said, okay, you got kids. And let's just say one of his kids is Sarah. I said, let's fast forward 25 years from now. And Sarah comes to you and says, Dad, I'm in this corporate job in corporate America. I'm hating it. It's killing me. It's stifling me. It's just like, it's slowly killing me. Dad, what should I do? And without even breathing in, he didn't even need the oxygen in his body to speak. He just pushed it out as a protective father or parent would do. He goes, oh my God, I tell her to leave immediately. And I said, great. So if that's the case, why don't you do it for you? And what'll end up happening is that will be a lecture in 25 years, not a conversation. Number one is, most likely, she'll be standing in front of him in 25 years, rolling her eyes externally or internally, because really she's hearing from, with respect, somebody who's telling her what to do, but didn't do it himself.
Right.
Option number 2 is, they sit down and she has this conversation. He said, well, actually, Sarah, you know what? 25 years ago, I did this and it scared the shit out of me. And this is what happened. And it didn't work, or it worked, or it was amazing, but it led me to this. And she goes, wow, my dad did it. Wow. And she decides that is enough encouragement and inspiration because her hero did it. Or number 3, the conversation doesn't even happen because it doesn't need to happen, because his daughter's brought up in an inspirational environment where her dad puts a value on his skin and a value on everybody else and decides to do it. And therefore she's grown up in that. And therefore she never has to seek permission. She just does it organically. So the minute we brought it back to his kids, it changed the focus. If he couldn't do it for him, maybe he can do it for them.
I do that with a lot of entrepreneurs. I ask them what they would have. A lot of them are advising people or giving. I'm often advising a visionary, and they have a team full of people that they're often talking to. And one of them, Jennifer Love from One More Woman, she has an organization that supports women entrepreneurs. And I asked her one time, she was telling me what she thinks she should do next in her business, and it just didn't feel right to me. It didn't feel, not right or wrong, it didn't feel like her decision. It didn't make sense to me. It was off. And I didn't know how to really go about. You can tell someone anything and they'll never listen. You have to let them realize it on their own. And so I asked her the question. I said, I want to go through a thought experiment. I want you to think of one of the women in your group that you often give advice to, financial advice, different things like that. Okay, you got the person's name. Tell me the name. Okay, we've got her. Hold that person in mind. Now she's got a similar situation going on, and I paint the situation for her. And I said, don't think about the other thing we just talked about. Just go roll with me here fast. And so we went through the situation. I said, one question. I asked one simple question at a time. And I led her through step by step what she would tell that person. And I went deeper and deeper and deeper. And by the end, we had literally formed a legal agreement that she needs to have for her own business.
Love it.
It was essentially, don't take money from this investor. Don't do this at this time because the business is going to grow in a certain period of time and you don't want that hanging over you. All you need is a loan, and you could get a low interest loan. And what if the terms were this? Yes, you could pay it back in 6 months. We literally hammered it out in less than 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And she had the perfect advice for someone else, but she didn't give herself permission for the same advice.
Yeah.
And so it was a big eye opener for her. One last thing just that I wanted to get to on the kids thing, because I'm a parent of 2 kids. A lot of people listening might be parents as well, or have similar excuses that they hold in place. Because kids, it seems like one of the best excuses. If you're not going to go to do something, or you're not going to pursue a dream full out, it's very easy to blame your spouse or your kids and say, well, you know what, I'm doing this for the family. I'm saying no to this opportunity because of the family. And like you said, you're not getting their permission. They haven't told you to do that. If you told them that this is a once in a lifetime opportunity that I have over here, I would love to do it, but I was thinking I just wouldn't because I didn't want to trouble you guys. They'll probably push you and say, Dad, go do it. But I've noticed that if you use the kids as the excuse, it builds resentment over time. It's a perfect formula for resentment. That kid becomes the actual reason and the resentment for you not pursuing your dream.
Yes.
And I see that every day with parents.
All the time. It's it's enormous. And for a lot of parents, the idea that you could be resentful towards your children in any capacity for doing anything is ludicrous to some. I often see this with mothers who choose to have children and choose to focus on their children for a period of time and choose to put their career path, their own startups, their own opportunities for entrepreneurial endeavors on hold. And they end up becoming angry, and they get angry at themselves. They get angry at their husbands, and often they're angry at their kids because they feel, right or wrong, that their kids have disrupted their momentum up the corporate ladder or whatever it happens to be. So yeah, the resentment builds up. And one thing I just want to circle back to, it just came up there as you were speaking, was this story. And again, I hope it doesn't come across as kind of preaching and judgmental and looking down and telling people, because this is exactly the story I told myself, James, for many years. And that is, I really want to do this coaching. I want to run workshops. I want to speak. I want to help people. I want to do whatever it was. But the story I told myself, either consciously or subconscious, when I make enough money, when I have my home run, I'll have all of this bandwidth and all of this runway to come back to, and then I can do the most meaningful work of my life. And that was a story I told myself for years. So I find that in the startup space as well, in the entrepreneurial world, as people are running businesses that they're really, it's not a reflection of who they are. They're clearly not connected to the business. It doesn't really make a difference for them or anything else. And that's fine. You don't have to love everything you do, but find that joy somewhere else. And they're building a business, and their rationalization is, when I sell this business, I take all this money off the table, then I'll be able to go and do what I love. Now, there's rare cases that's happened. My experience is the finish line for the exit of that business continues, number one, and suddenly it's 10 or 15 or 20 years later before they come back and try to create the startup that they really want to start, the one that's in their heart. And ironically, often the one that'll make the greatest impact and blueprint in the world, or footprint in the world, I should say. But sometimes they don't get to it, or when they're ready to do it, the energy is gone. They've burnt themselves out from pursuing something because when you're building something that you love, it's one thing. You're building something that you don't love, there's an emotional cost that you cannot put a price on until the finish line, and then you're exhausted and there's nothing left in the tank to build something of meaning.
And these are the most productive years of a lot of people's lives.
Yes.
The most productive. And they think, oh, when I get to 65, I'll get busy on the real work or something like that. And you might not have your health. You might not even get there. You might not have the money to retire. There's so many variables. And even if it's a young, eager entrepreneur, they're like, oh, I just need 5 years. That's not a big amount of time. But like you said, it blooms to 10 and then 15, and then there's, oh, well, that idea didn't work out, so then I just got to restart the plan now. And as someone who sees people do this all the time, why not fix the problem before it happens? Yeah. Get at the bottom of base camp, figure out which mountain we're climbing and why, and then support them along the climb.
And what's wrong with going to whatever your format is, whether it's a therapy, whether it's a coaching, whether it's a workshop, and this is not me even promoting my work, is find somebody that you trust and you respect, and somebody that's willing to really challenge you. Because a lot of coaches out there in the world are there to tell you how great you are and validate how you feel. And that's another thing. You talk about having somebody in your corner that's willing to point out your blind spots. Mm-hmm. And here's something that I find with so many founders. Almost every founder says, I'm open to feedback. In fact, you know what? I love feedback. Bullshit. I don't know anybody that loves feedback, because feedback tends to have both the positive and the negative. And none of us want to be told that we're not great. None of us want to be told that we have big heads. None of us want to be told that we're ugly. None of us want to be told that we're rude or whatever it happens to be. But find somebody in your life that is willing to, we always say, well, I have an open door policy. Anybody can come in and give me feedback. To a point, you ask the people that are sitting outside in the office in the cubicles, do you really feel safe at knocking on that door and challenge that person? Absolutely. But if they kick back, are you willing to go deeper? No. So what we tend to do is surround ourselves consciously or subconsciously with yes people that agree with us and tell us that everything's going to be awesome. They prop us up and they tell us. And most visionaries are brilliant at manipulating everybody around them. And when I say manipulating, that sounds kind of borderline out of integrity, but I mean convincing, selling, promoting. We're brilliant at getting people excited about an idea. The challenge is that when we get people so excited about a vision, very few people are given the space to come in and say, listen, I know this vision is important to you, but you're losing yourself along the way. So finding somebody, but anyway, even if you find somebody and you go and you do coaching, or you go to a workshop or go to a retreat, even if you come out the end going, you know what, I'm bang on track. I'm absolutely exactly where I want to be. That to me is time well spent.
For sure. Wow. So there's one thing I wanted to get to, but I think it would take a little while to go into. We should probably wrap up, and it feels like we just started. But next time that we have this kind of a conversation on a podcast, I'd love to go into people's superpower, or a statement that you've had, a quote, is something along the lines of, often people find that their greatest gift is right next to their deepest wound.
Yes.
Their greatest gift is right next to their deepest wound. And I've personally realized that. I've done work with you, and it's helped excavate some of that. And that was at Brave Soul. And One Last Talk, I'm actually one of your speakers in a couple days from now. And that's a really big insight that I think a lot of people could really use, because I think we actually create businesses. One person told me one time that your inner critic, a lot of entrepreneurs that have made money and been successful in some way, if you were to reverse engineer or look at the opposite of what their business does, it's often what their inner critic is saying. And so if your dad, and oftentimes your inner critic is in one of your parents' voices as well.
Yes.
So say your dad's in your head saying, be quiet, don't be seen, don't be heard, whatever that is. You end up being a YouTube celebrity, with your face everywhere, and you're trying to promote yourself, and you got this significance that you need to feel in the world. It's almost a reaction to that bit of a wound that you have. But if you can just understand and align that, it becomes a place of fuel and a place of purpose to be able to, maybe you start a YouTube network for other people's voices that you think need to be heard in the world, or people that you think need to be seen. And you start to use the gift in a new way to bring the people around you up and use it for other people, not just for yourself, and not out of vengeance or spite or anything like that. The fuel becomes, maybe out of anger or something corrosive. The fuel becomes love or acceptance of yourself, of the pain, of the process, of the wound. And as it heals, you can use that gift for other people. So
I'm going to say something, just two quick things, if I may, on this, because I know you want to do a deeper dive into this, and it would be very valuable to do so. But two things: the gift lies next. Your greatest gift lies next to your deepest wound. Is also, if you think about it as it relates to the world today, so many people are looking for their purpose and trying to find out what they're passionate about and trying to find out who they are and what they want to do when they grow up. And so many people, that is a very elusive journey for them. And it makes a lot of sense that the last place you would ever think about looking for your gift is right next to your greatest pain, because we don't want to experience pain as human beings. We don't want to go back into our past. We don't want to overturn those rocks and those boulders and look underneath and dig out the shit. We don't want to do that. So therefore, wouldn't it make sense to some extent that the reason that these things are elusive is almost that they are in places we don't want to go. They're also, it's almost like it's almost too obvious. But the other thing, you talked about there very quickly is that I know entrepreneurs who have built entire businesses, fortunes and empires based on trying to seek validation from somebody like their dad or their mom or whatever it happens to be. I've seen Olympic athletes I've spent time with Olympic athletes in a coaching capacity, go to the Olympic Games, and they're there not to support and to represent their country. That's the story they told me, and that's the story they tell themselves. They're there because they're seeking validation from their parents or somebody in society. But what's really interesting is one of the reasons entrepreneurs and leaders and founders don't want to mess with that is that they tell themselves that it served them to a point. So somebody grew up in poverty and they're now a multi-millionaire. Mm-hmm. They'll go, you see, that drive, that need not to ever experience that pain of poverty, look what it's done for me. It's gotten me to where I am. Mm-hmm. And yeah, but it's never going to get you to where you want to go, ever, because it's a negative charge. And here's the problem. When you lean in and begin to dismantle that with them, with their support, they get nervous. They go, hang on, don't take away this internal drive, because it'll diminish my ability to graft and push and grind and build another business. My experience is every single time someone's willing to dismantle that monster that has served them to a point, but it's not going to serve them in the future. Every time what happens is this: their drive does not diminish. Their drive does not diminish. What happens is their drive focuses. And what ends up happening is they end up bringing a greater degree of focus to doing something that they truly want to do, which has a greater reach and a greater impact. So in actual fact, I am more driven than I've ever been, but I'm not being driven by something that doesn't support me. I'm being driven by making a greater impact in the world, where before it was always, I was running from something as opposed to moving to something. I suppose that's the best way to describe it.
Wow. Yeah, no, that's been a big realization for me. Using non-corrosive fuel is just a lot better for the overall vehicle and the journey. A lot more fun too.
Yeah, well, that's the other thing. Oh yeah, we didn't mention fun.
Yeah, I mean, totally different fun. It also attracts a totally different type of people.
Yes.
That you end up working with, and the partners that you end up taking, that you trust. And yeah, there's a lot more that we could talk about in another session.
I had an entrepreneur the other day said to me, he said, the biggest thing I've gotten from, and again, I don't take responsibility. We did this work together. He's doing the majority of the lifting. He said, I'm having so much more fun. And he said, business is quote unquote easy. And he was almost suspicious of using that term, because he said, I'm afraid to say it because I'm afraid it'll just go back to the way it used to be. He said, I'm just doing deals. I've got opportunities. I've acquired a business. I've done this. And he said, it's just the ease in which, the peace that he has in his heart and his mind as it relates to growing his business. He never imagined that was possible.
Right. Yeah, and some people would call that power versus force.
Yes.
So there's the element of like a positive charge that is powerful and almost like the sun radiating, as opposed to the force, which is the person just with a machete hacking down this forest, trying to build this business. And the sun gets it done pretty well.
Yes, 100%.
So thanks so much for being on today and for sharing this stuff. Just to reflect back to you, I think there's a lot of people that don't understand some of these elements, or maybe they are standing under it, but they're not in it. They've thought about it, they've read books on it, they've understood it maybe very well, but why not step into it and actually be part of it? And so I think for people to make decisions in their life based on this advice, I think they need to see mentors. I think they need to see other people around them making these types of decisions and see what happens. When the entrepreneur sees that, I've asked questions to people saying, well, okay, the 5-year plan, and then it flips, and then you'll just be fine and you'll have a great life after. So who's your mentor? Who's your, biographies you're reading? Who are the people that have done that successfully that you're following? And they can't imagine anyone. They just see everyone trying for it.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really important to just share the people that you're working with, encourage them to share their stories with the people around them. For me, people like me to be able to focus and put a platform out for people like you to share this stuff with the world. And I think there's a really exponential impact that could happen with the wisdom that's being shared on all these startups. And I think that if, startups are very influential, so it's not like we're dealing with, just the person sitting at home, sewing away, and they're going to have this, experience in their life. And these are revolutionaries at their best.
Yeah.
If they can actually get in touch with this, they can experience that inner healing and the inner power that comes with alignment. and everyone knows the feeling of unalignment. And they often can imagine certain times of life where they were fairly aligned. And so as you kind of come back and hone, I think that's my dream, is to have a lot of the entrepreneurs we work with or people that we come across to see more and more people that are aligned with their vision, even if it's not something that we're interested in investing in or advising. We want to see people align with their vision because we think it's just better for everyone.
Absolutely. Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Thanks so much for being on.
Yeah, appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode. We take every listener to this podcast very seriously, and we'd love to keep in touch with you directly. So please subscribe to our Scaling Impact community by subscribing to our email list at exv.ai/podcast. That's exv.ai/podcast.